The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves, muffling Selene's footsteps as she ran. Freedom was a scent she'd only ever dreamed of, a tantalizing whisper on the wind that tasted of pine and wild, untamed earth. Behind her, the suffocating familiarity of the Blackwood pack was a weight she was desperate to shed. She was an omega, the lowest of the low, a scapegoat for every misfortune and a punching bag for their frustrations. Tonight, under the sliver of a new moon, she was finally taking her life back. She had planned this for months, stashing scraps of food and a worn leather flask of water. She knew the patrol routes, the blind spots in the territory's defenses. What she hadn't accounted for was him. Alpha Roland. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked down her spine at the thought of his name. He was a ruthless, powerful leader who had taken over the pack 5 years ago, his reign marked by a cold, brutal efficiency that terrified everyone. He was a ghost in his own pack, rarely seen, but his presence was a suffocating blanket of authority. A twig snapped behind her. Selene froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She strained her ears, listening past the pounding of her own blood. Nothing. She was being paranoid. Forcing her legs to move, she pushed deeper into the woods, the thorny branches tearing at her thin tunic. Just a little further and she would be beyond their borders, a ghost on the wind. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl ripped through the silence. It was close. Too close. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. She broke into a frantic sprint, her lungs burning, her only thought to outrun the beast hunting her. The growl escalated into a furious roar, and the sound of heavy paws thundering on the ground behind her was the sound of her world ending. A massive, shadowy form burst through the undergrowth, a blur of black fur and moonlight. The Alpha's wolf. It was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, a creature of nightmare and legend, its silver eyes burning with a predatory fire that was aimed directly at her. Chapter 2. Caught in the Alpha's shadow. Selene didn't have a chance. The colossal wolf slammed into her, and the world became a dizzying vortex of teeth and fur. She hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. The beast was on top of her in an instant, its immense weight pinning her to the forest floor. A hot, musky scent filled her senses, overwhelming and terrifyingly masculine. Sharp claws, thankfully sheathed, pressed into her shoulders, holding her immobile. Fear was a tangible thing, a cold dread that paralyzed her from the inside out. This was it. This was her punishment for daring to dream of escape. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the tearing of flesh, the final agonizing pain. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt a hot breath ghost across her neck, followed by a deep, rumbling growl that vibrated through her entire body. The wolf wasn't attacking. It was inhaling her scent. Slowly, hesitantly, she opened her eyes. The wolf's massive head was lowered, its silver eyes inches from hers. The feral rage was gone, replaced by something she couldn't decipher. A raw, possessive intensity that was almost more terrifying. The world seemed to narrow to those two molten pools of silver. Time stretched and warped, and Selene felt a strange, primal pull, a flicker of recognition in the deepest, most animal part of her soul that she couldn't understand. Then the air shifted. The pressure on her body changed as the wolf began to transform. Bones cracked and reformed with sickening snaps, fur receded, and the feral beast was replaced by the man. Alpha Roland knelt over her, his body lean and corded with muscle, his bare skin gleaming in the faint moonlight. His dark hair was a wild mess, and those same silver eyes, now in a human face, held her captive. He was even more intimidating as a man. "You," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly sound that sent shivers down her spine. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure energy that made her flinch. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let me go." A muscle clenched in his jaw. "Go?" he repeated, the word laced with a dark, dangerous possessiveness. "You are not going anywhere." Before she could process his words, he lowered his head to her neck. She felt the sharp prick of his canines against her skin, a prelude to the bite that would end her. But instead of tearing her throat out, he licked a slow, deliberate path along the sensitive curve where her neck met her shoulder. A gasp escaped her lips, a traitorous sound of shock and an unwilling spark of pleasure. "You smell of rain and wild herbs," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with a strange hunger. You smell of mine. Chapter 3. The Unwanted Mark. Selene's mind screamed at her to fight, to run, but her body was frozen, caught between paralyzing fear and a bewildering primal response to his touch. His words echoed in her ears. It was the language of possession, the claim of an alpha. He shifted, his powerful thighs bracketing her hips, his presence an overwhelming force. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the thrum of power that was quintessentially him. He buried his face in her neck again, his breath hot and ragged. She felt the low growl rumbling in his chest, a sound that vibrated straight through to her soul. I should have known, he breathed, his voice a mixture of fury and awe. That scent. I've been hunting it in my dreams. Before she could ask what he meant, his wolf took over. A feral light blazed in his silver eyes. He tilted her head to the side, exposing the vulnerable column of her throat. This was no longer just a threat, it was a promise. Panic, sharp and visceral, finally broke through her paralysis. She struggled, pushing against his unyielding chest. No. Please don't, she cried, her voice cracking. Her pleas were lost to the wind. He opened his mouth and she saw the glint of his elongated canines. The world narrowed to a single point of terror. Then he bit down. It was not the killing bite she had expected. It was a searing white-hot agony that shot through her entire nervous system, a pain so profound it stole her breath. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound of anguish. But beneath the pain something else was happening. A dizzying, intoxicating energy flooded her veins, a torrent of raw power, of pure alpha dominance, pouring into her from him. It was a violation and a branding, an indelible claim that sank deeper than flesh and bone. Her world dissolved into a whirlwind of sensation. His power, her pain, the scent of his skin, the taste of her own blood. She felt the bond snap into place, an invisible, unbreakable tether that linked her soul to his. It was a horrifying, intimate invasion. He finally pulled back, his lips stained with her blood. His silver eyes were glazed over, pupils blown wide with feral satisfaction. He looked down at the bleeding mark on her neck, a symbol of his ownership now permanently etched into her skin. Selene lay broken beneath him, tears streaming down her face, a sob catching in her throat. She had tried to escape, to find freedom. Instead she had been caught, claimed, and marked by the one man she feared above all others. She was no longer just an omega. She was the alpha's mate. And her cage had just become infinitely smaller. Chapter 4. The Gilded Cage. Roland lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his arms a cage of corded muscle. The world swayed, her body still reeling from the shock of the marking bite. The pain in her neck had subsided to a throbbing, burning ache, a constant physical reminder of the bond that now shackled her to him. He carried her back toward the pack house, his long, purposeful strides eating up the distance she had fought so hard to cover. The forest that had promised freedom now felt like the closing walls of a prison. He didn't speak. The silence was heavy, charged with his raw possession and her terrified despair. When they reached the edge of the woods, the pack house loomed before them, a large, formidable structure of timber and stone. Lights were on and the sense of worried pack members filled the air. They had discovered her missing. Roland strode through the main entrance without breaking his stride. The chattering in the great hall ceased instantly. Dozens of eyes turned to them, widening in shock and disbelief as they saw Selene, the Omega outcast, cradled in the Alpha's arms, his mark bleeding freely on her neck. Gasps rippled through the room. He ignored them all, his focus solely on her. He carried her up the main staircase to the Alpha's private quarters, a section of the house she had never dared to even look at before. The rooms were masculine and sparse, dominated by a huge stone fireplace and a massive bed made of dark carved wood. He laid her gently on the furs covering the bed, the softness a stark contrast to the harsh reality of her situation. "Clean yourself," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. He gestured to an adjoining door. "There is a bathroom. I will have clothes sent up." With that he turned and left, the heavy wooden door closing with a definitive thud that echoed the closing of her cage door. Selene stared after him, trembling. She slowly pushed herself up, her limbs feeling weak and foreign. Catching her reflection in a dark, polished wardrobe, she saw the mark. It was a swirl of angry red and deep purple, his teeth marks a stark declaration of ownership. A wave of nausea washed over her. She stumbled into the bathroom, a luxurious space of slate and steel that was larger than the small room she had shared with two other Omegas. Turning on the silver tap, she splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the feeling of his mouth on her skin, the memory of his power invading hers. But it was useless. The bond was a living thing inside her, a constant thrum of his presence in the back of her mind, a connection she hadn't asked for and didn't want. She was tied to the monster who had hunted her down, and there was no escape. Chapter 5. Whispers and Daggers. The clothes that arrived were finer than anything Selene had ever owned. A soft, deep blue tunic and supple leather leggings. They felt alien against her skin. Dressed, she sat on the edge of the massive bed, feeling small and exposed. A short while later, an older she-wolf named Alara, the pack's healer, entered without knocking. Her face was a mask of stern disapproval as she came to inspect the mark. "Alpha's orders," she said, her voice clipped. Her fingers were rough as she applied a soothing balm to the tender skin. A mating bite should be tended to prevent infection. Her eyes, however, were filled with a cold pity that felt like a slap. "You poor foolish girl. Did you really think you could run from him?" The whispers started the next morning. When Roland forced her to leave the room and join him for the morning meal, the silence in the dining hall was deafening. Every eye was on her, on the dark, healing mark on her neck. The pack members who had once sneered at her or shoved her out of the way now stared with a mixture of shock, envy, and thinly veiled contempt. She was no longer just Selene the Omega. She was the Alpha's. What? She wasn't his chosen mate. She was his captured mate. The pack's beta, a hard-faced wolf named Kale, watched her with open hostility. His sister, Lyra, a beautiful and cruel she-wolf who had always believed she would be the pack's Luna, looked at Selene as if she were something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. "I don't understand Alpha," Kale said, his voice tight with disrespect as he addressed Roland, though his glare was fixed on Selene. "She is an Omega. Weak. How can she possibly be your mate?" Roland's fork clattered onto his plate. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. "My wolf chose her," he stated, his tone flat and deadly. "The matter is not open for discussion. You will show her the respect she is due." The threat was clear. Kale fell silent, but his hatred was a palpable force. Throughout the day, Selene was followed by whispers and glares that felt like daggers in her back. They saw her as an interloper, a weak link who had somehow tricked their powerful Alpha. She was more alone now in the heart of the pack than she had ever been on its fringes. She had traded a life of physical abuse for one of psychological torment, and the weight of it was crushing. Chapter 6. The Beast Within the Man. Days bled into a week. Selene lived in Roland's quarters, a prisoner in a gilded cage. He was a constant, brooding presence. He slept in the same bed, his body a wall of heat beside her, yet he never touched her beyond the accidental brush of skin. He spoke only when necessary, his commands short and clipped. Yet through the unwanted bond she felt things she didn't want to feel. She felt the crushing weight of his responsibilities, the constant simmering rage he kept leashed just beneath his skin, and a profound aching loneliness that mirrored her own. It was confusing and deeply unsettling. She wanted to hate him, and she did. He had taken her freedom, forced this bond upon her. But the glimpses of the man beneath the beast were chipping away at the pure, simple edges of her hatred. One evening, a dispute with a neighboring pack over territory reached a boiling point. Roland returned from a tense border meeting late at night, his entire being radiating a barely contained violence. The air in the room crackled with his fury. Selene was curled in a chair by the fire, trying to read a book she'd found on a shelf. When he stormed in, she flinched, expecting the rage to be directed at her, as it so often was with others. He paced the room like a caged animal, his fists clenching and unclenching. A low growl escaped his throat, and for a moment she saw his eyes flash with the feral light of his wolf. He was losing control. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she stood up. "Roland," she said, her voice soft but clear. He stopped, his head snapping towards her. His eyes were wild, silver infernos. "Get back," he snarled, the sound more beast than man. She should have been terrified. A part of her was. But the bond was humming between them, a conduit for his pain and rage. She felt the desperate struggle within him, the fight to keep his wolf from tearing everything apart. Instead of retreating, she took a hesitant step forward. "It's all right," she whispered, holding out a hand not to touch him but as a gesture of peace. "Breathe." He stared at her, his chest heaving. The feral light in his eyes warred with something else, shock. No one had ever dared to approach him when he was like this. Slowly, painstakingly, she watched him wrestle his inner demon back into its cage. The violent tension in his shoulders eased and the growl subsided. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them they were his own again, albeit filled with a raw, stark vulnerability that stole her breath. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time since that night in the forest. And in his gaze she saw not a monster, but a man haunted by the beast he carried inside him. Chapter 7. A Glimmer of Touch. The incident in his chambers marked a subtle shift between them. Roland was still distant, still the intimidating alpha, but a new awareness had settled in his gaze when he looked at her. He started watching her, not as a warden watches a prisoner, but as a man watches a woman who mystifies him. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the suffocating atmosphere of the pack house, Selene wandered into the castle's neglected library. It was dusty and forgotten, but it was quiet. She ran her fingers over the cracked leather spines of ancient books, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She had always loved stories, tales of other worlds where she could be someone else, someone strong and free. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Roland standing in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. He said nothing, simply watched her. Self-consciously, she turned back to the shelf, stretching on her tiptoes, but the book remained just out of reach. A warm, solid chest pressed against her back and a long arm reached over her head. Her breath hitched in her throat. Roland's body was a furnace against hers, and his clean, masculine scent of pine and cold air enveloped her. He easily plucked the book from the shelf, his fingers brushing against hers as he handed it to her. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a bolt of lightning through her. Through the bond, she felt a jolt of his own reaction, a surge of possessive desire so potent it made her knees weak. She quickly stepped away, clutching the book to her chest like a shield, her heart racing. "Thank you," she mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "What are you reading?" His voice was low, closer than she expected. She glanced at the cover. "Just an old book of lore. About the first wolves." He nodded, his silver eyes fixed on her face. "My mother used to read those." The admission was so unexpected, so personal that she finally looked up at him. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a memory, a hint of sadness. It was another crack in the armor of the ruthless alpha, a glimpse of the man he kept hidden away. He held her gaze for a long moment before turning and leaving as silently as he had arrived, leaving Selene with a racing pulse and a deeply conflicted heart. The monster had a past, and he had for a moment touched her as if she were something precious. Chapter 8. The Rival's Scent. Pack life continued to be a trial. Lyra, the beta's sister, missed no opportunity to undermine Selene. She would make snide remarks just loud enough for her to hear or accidentally spill things on her. It was petty and childish, but it wore on Selene's already frayed nerves. Roland, when he noticed, would quell the behavior with a single icy glare that sent Lyra scurrying away, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. The tension with the neighboring Red Creek pack escalated. Their alpha, a notoriously aggressive and ambitious wolf named Gideon, was pushing the boundaries, testing Roland's defenses. Rumors flew that Gideon had been hoping to force an alliance by mating with Lyra, a plan now thwarted by Selene's unexpected arrival as Roland's mate. One day, while walking near the edge of the territory, Selene stumbled upon a patrol. Kale, Roland's beta, was there along with Lyra and a few other warriors. They were speaking with two wolves from Red Creek. The air was thick with hostility. "Our alpha simply wishes to extend his greetings to your alpha's new mate," one of the Red Creek wolves said, his eyes lingering on Selene with a slimy, appraising look. His scent was sharp and unpleasant, like stale blood and arrogance. Lyra stepped forward, a malicious smile on her face. "Here she is now. The little Omega who caught the alpha's eye. Isn't she underwhelming?" Selene's cheeks flushed with humiliation. She wanted to turn and run, but she was rooted to the spot. "Gideon is disappointed," the other wolf continued, ignoring Lyra and speaking directly to Selene. He appreciates strength. He wonders what an alpha like Roland sees in such a weak, unmarked omega. He was deliberately trying to provoke a reaction to insult not just her but Roland through her. Before she could respond, a low growl echoed from the trees behind her. Roland emerged from the shadows, his face a thunderous mask of fury. His presence was so powerful, so utterly dominant, that the Red Creek wolves instinctively took a step back, their heads lowering in submission. "My mate's strength is not for you to question," Roland snarled, his voice a low, deadly promise. He moved to stand in front of Selene, shielding her with his body. "You will deliver a message to Gideon for me. Stay off my land. And keep your eyes and your thoughts off my mate. Or the next time we meet I will tear your throat out." The wolves scrambled away, tails between their legs. Roland turned, his silver eyes scanning her, checking for any harm. In that moment he wasn't just her captor. He was her protector. And the fierce, possessive way he had defended her stirred a dangerous, fluttering warmth in her chest. Chapter 9. The Heat of the Bond. The encounter at the border ignited something between them. Roland's protectiveness had been a raw, instinctual display of the mating bond, and it left an undeniable tension humming in the air. That night the feeling was a palpable entity in their chambers. A storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in Selene's heart. She was toweling her hair dry after a bath when Roland entered the room. He had been training and his body was slick with a light sheen of sweat, his muscles taut beneath his skin. He stopped when he saw her, his silver eyes darkening as they roamed over her form, clad only in a thin chemise. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken desire. The bond, which had been a low thrum in the back of her mind, now flared to life, a searing, undeniable heat. She could feel his need as if it were her own, a deep, primal hunger that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Her own body responded betrayingly, a liquid warmth pooling low in her belly. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just before her. He raised a hand, his knuckles gently grazing her cheek. His touch was hesitant, as if he were afraid of breaking her. "Selene," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. She should have pulled away. She should have slapped his hand away and reminded him that she was his prisoner. But she couldn't. The raw loneliness she felt in him through the bond, the desperate need to connect, resonated with her own deep-seated isolation. For the first time she didn't flinch from his touch. Seeing her acceptance, he lowered his head, his lips hovering just above hers. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his breath a warm caress against her mouth. "Tell me to leave you alone and I will." It was a choice. Perhaps the first real choice he had given her. And the answer should have been simple. But looking into his silver eyes, seeing the storm of his own conflict, the beast and the man at war, she couldn't say the words. Instead she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. His mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was a deluge of pent-up hunger and desperate possession, a raw expression of the bond that tied them together. He tasted of the storm outside and the power within him. He tangled his fingers in her damp hair, pulling her head back as he deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, demanding entrance. And to her own astonishment, Selene gave it, opening herself up to the man who was both her captor and her protector, her fear and her forbidden desire. Chapter 10. Surrender. The kiss shattered Selene's remaining defenses. It wasn't a conqueror's kiss. It was the kiss of a starving man. He poured all his loneliness, his frustration and his dark, aching need for her into it, and through the bond she felt every nuance. Her own loneliness rose up to meet his, and she found herself kissing him back with a desperation that shocked her. His hands moved from her hair, sliding down her back, tracing the curve of her spine before settling on her hips, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the hard evidence of his arousal, and instead of fear, a jolt of purely feminine power shot through her. The alpha, the most powerful wolf in the region, was losing control because of her. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "You have no idea what you do to me," he rasped, his voice thick with a desire that was on the edge of breaking. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed. He laid her down on the soft furs, his silver eyes never leaving hers, asking a silent question. This time there would be no taking, no forcing. This had to be her surrender. Selene's heart pounded. This man had hunted her, marked her against her will and held her captive. But he had also protected her, shown her glimpses of a broken man, and right now he was offering her a choice. Her mind screamed 1,000 warnings, but her body, her very soul, yearned for the connection the bond promised. It ached for the intimacy, the one thing she had been denied her entire life. Slowly she reached up and cupped his jaw, her thumb stroking the rough stubble there. It was answer enough. A shudder racked his powerful frame. He lowered his head and began to worship her with his mouth, trailing a line of hot open-mouthed kisses from her jaw down the column of her throat, deliberately avoiding the still tender mating mark. His hands were both gentle and firm as he divested her of her thin chemise, his eyes burning with reverence as he looked at her. He undressed himself with an agonizing slowness, revealing a body built for power and war, scarred and beautiful. When he finally came to her, skin against skin, the contact was electric. It was no longer about captor and captive. It was about a man and a woman, a fated pair finally succumbing to the destiny that had been forced upon them. As he entered her, slowly and with exquisite care, Selene met his gaze. In the depths of his silver eyes she saw not just lust, but a desperate, terrifying vulnerability. He was giving her all of him, the man and the beast. And as she arched up to meet him, she realized she was doing the same. Chapter 11. The morning after. Selene awoke to the soft morning light filtering through the window and the unfamiliar weight of a heavy arm draped protectively over her waist. She was nestled against Roland's chest, his steady heartbeat a soothing rhythm against her ear. The scent of him, of pine and clean musk, enveloped her. For a fleeting moment she felt a sense of peace, of belonging that was utterly foreign. Then the memories of the previous night came rushing back. The heated kisses, the surrender, the raw intimacy. A flush crept up her neck. She had given herself to her captor. She tried to slip out of his grasp, but the arm around her tightened, pulling her closer. "Don't," he murmured, his voice a low, sleepy rumble against her hair. She froze. I should get up." He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. His hair was tousled, and his face was free from the usual harsh lines of command. In the soft light he looked younger, almost gentle. "Stay," he said, his silver eyes searching hers. "Please." The word please from him was so unexpected it left her speechless. She saw a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze, the look of a man afraid she would regret what had happened. The alpha was asking, not commanding. She settled back against the pillows, her heart doing a strange, fluttering dance. They lay in silence for a long time, simply looking at each other. The bond between them was a warm, humming current, no longer a source of conflict but a quiet connection. "Why?" she finally whispered, the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you never take a chosen mate?" "Lyra, everyone thought it would be her." A shadow crossed his face. He looked away, staring at the ceiling. "Lyra wants power. She wants the title of Luna. She doesn't want the man who comes with it," he said, his voice flat. "My wolf." He would never have accepted her. He was waiting. "For what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His gaze returned to hers, intense and unwavering. "For you." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the mating mark on her neck. It no longer ached. "From the moment I first caught your scent on the wind weeks ago, my wolf has been restless. He knew our mate was near. When you ran, he thought he was losing you. He would have torn the world apart to get to you." The confession hung in the air between them. He hadn't just been hunting an escapee. He had been hunting his other half. The revelation didn't excuse what he had done, but it painted his actions in a new, more complex light. Chapter 12. Aluna's First Steps. The change in their relationship did not go unnoticed. When Roland and Selene entered the dining hall together that morning, there was a new intimacy between them. He kept a hand on the small of her back, a simple possessive gesture that spoke volumes. The whispers didn't stop, but now they were tinged with confusion and a grudging curiosity. Lyra's face was a mask of pure venom. She watched every interaction, every shared glance, with simmering hatred. Roland seemed determined to establish Selene's new position. "Selene will be taking over the Luna's duties," he announced to the pack's senior members, including a seething Kale. "She will oversee the running of the household and the welfare of the pack members." You will give her the same respect you give me. Selene's panic was immediate. She knew nothing of being a Luna. She had spent her life being invisible. Now he was thrusting her into the spotlight. She tried to protest later in the privacy of their rooms. I can't do this, Roland. I don't know how. They hate me. You will learn, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. He took her hands in his. You have a strength you don't recognize, Selene. You stood up to me when my wolf was on the verge of breaking. You have a quiet compassion that this pack desperately needs. It has been ruled by fear for too long. His faith in her was both terrifying and strangely empowering. Hesitantly she began to try. She started by visiting the kitchens, a place she knew well from her Omega duties. At first the kitchen staff were wary, but she spoke to them with a quiet respect they had never received from someone of high rank. She asked about their needs, about the strain on supplies. She discovered small problems, simple things that had been overlooked, and she brought them to Roland's attention. He listened, truly listened, and implemented her suggestions. Slowly, a few members of the pack began to see her differently. They saw a Luna who cared not for power but for their well-being. It was a small start, but it was a seed of change in a garden of animosity. Chapter 13. Gideon's Gambit. The tentative peace was shattered by a message from the Red Creek pack. Alpha Gideon requested a formal meeting on neutral ground to discuss the ongoing territory disputes. He specifically requested that Roland bring his new mate. It's a trap, Kale argued vehemently during the council meeting. He wants to see her to gauge your attachment. He will see her as a weakness. She is not a weakness, Roland growled, his eyes flashing. Selene, who was now required to attend these meetings, felt a knot of fear in her stomach. She had seen the leering look in the eyes of Gideon's wolves. The thought of meeting their alpha face-to-face was terrifying. I will go, she said, her voice quiet but firm, surprising everyone including herself. If I am to be Luna, I will not hide in fear. But I will not be a pawn in his game. Roland looked at her, a flicker of pride in his silver eyes. He agreed to the meeting. The meeting took place in a clearing halfway between their territories. Gideon was exactly as she had imagined. Large, brutish, with cold, calculating eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. He let his gaze roam over Selene in a deliberately insulting way. So, this is the Omega that has the great Alpha Roland so captivated, Gideon said with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. I must admit, I don't see the appeal. Roland's hand tightened on the hilt of the knife at his belt, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Before he could react, Selene stepped forward. And you are the Alpha who is so insecure in his own power that he must insult a woman to feel strong, she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Alpha Roland's appeal is that he is not you. The clearing fell silent. Gideon's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. He had expected a timid, frightened Omega. He had not expected this quiet, defiant she-wolf. He had intended to throw Roland off balance by targeting his mate, but Selene had turned the tables, wounding his pride instead. The negotiations went nowhere as Gideon had never intended them to. But as they left, Selene knew she had made a dangerous new enemy. Gideon was no longer just targeting Roland. He was now targeting her. Chapter 14. The Poison of Betrayal. The failed meeting with Gideon put the entire pack on edge. Border patrols were doubled and a tense, watchful energy settled over the pack house. Selene's small victories in winning over pack members felt fragile in the face of the external threat. The true danger, however, was already inside their walls. Lyra's hatred had festered into something far more dangerous. Seeing Selene gain a foothold, earning not just the Alpha's bed but also a sliver of respect, was more than she could bear. She and her brother, Kale, began to conspire. Kale's loyalty to Roland was being eroded by his belief that Selene made the Alpha weak. One evening, Selene felt a sharp, stabbing pain through the bond, followed by a wave of dizziness and rage that was not her own. It was Roland. He was in distress. Guided by the bond, she raced out of their chambers and towards the training grounds. She found him there, surrounded by Kale and a handful of other warriors. Roland was on one knee, his face pale, a silver-tipped arrow protruding from his shoulder. Silver was poisoned to werewolves and the wound was already smoking, preventing him from healing. What have you done? Selene shrieked, rushing to his side. He is compromised, Kale snarled, his face contorted with a righteous fury. His obsession with this Omega has made him weak. He is unfit to lead. Uzaku. Kale had used Gideon's rising threat as an excuse to challenge Roland's authority, and he had done it with a poisoned weapon. Lyra stepped out from behind a tree, a cruel, triumphant smile on her face. It's over, Omega. Your little reign is done. Once he is dead, Kale will be Alpha and I will be his Luna. And you will wish for a quick death. Rage, fierce and protective, unlike anything Selene had ever felt, surged through her. Her own wolf, long dormant and suppressed by years of Omega submission, clawed at the surface. For the first time she felt not fear but a burning, primal fury. You will not touch him, she snarled, the voice that came out deeper, more guttural than her own. She stood over Roland's fallen form, a lone, defiant shield against the traitors. Chapter 15. An Omega's Roar. Kale laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. What are you going to do, Omega? Fold his laundry. The other warriors snickered, circling her and Roland, their intent clear. They would finish the Alpha and then deal with her. Roland struggled to rise, pulling at the silver arrow, a groan of agony escaping his lips. His strength was failing him. Selene, run, he gritted out, his voice strained. But she didn't run. She looked at the man who had marked her, the man she was inexplicably falling for, and then at the traitors who dared to harm him. The fear she had lived with her entire life burned away, replaced by the white-hot fire of a protective mate. I said, she repeated, her voice dropping to a deadly growl, do not touch him. A strange energy began to crackle around her. Her eyes, normally a soft brown, began to glow with a faint, inner light. The warriors hesitated, confused by the unexpected display of power. Kale, blinded by his ambition, charged forward. Get out of the way, you worthless bitch. As he lunged, something inside Selene snapped. A raw, untamed power erupted from her. It wasn't the physical power of a warrior but something older, more elemental. A force wave, smelling of ozone and ancient earth, blasted outwards from her body. Kale was thrown back as if hit by an invisible wall, landing in a heap 10 feet away. The other warriors stumbled, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Lyra shrieked, scrambling backwards. Selene stood panting, the strange power humming beneath her skin. She had no idea what she had just done, only that it had been fueled by her desperate need to protect Roland. She was no ordinary Omega. The momentary reprieve gave Roland the chance he needed. With a final agonized roar, he ripped the silver arrow from his shoulder. His healing abilities, though hampered by the poison, began to slowly knit the flesh back together. He staggered to his feet, his silver eyes blazing with a fury that promised death. The tide had turned. The loyalist pack members, hearing the commotion, were now arriving, their growls adding to the chorus. Kale and his co-conspirators were surrounded, their coup shattered by the unexpected roar of an Omega. Chapter 16. The Scars We Share. The traitors were quickly subdued. Kale and Lyra were dragged to the pack cells, their faces a mixture of disbelief and terror. The immediate threat was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Elara, the healer, worked frantically on Roland, purging the last of the silver from his system. The wound was healing, but it would leave a scar. Selene never left his side, her hand clutching his, the strange power within her having receded, leaving her feeling drained and shaken. Later that night, as he rested in their bed, she finally broke down, the tears she had held back falling freely. I was so scared, she sobbed. I thought I was going to lose you. Roland, his face pale but his eyes clear, pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. You saved me, he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with awe. That power. Selene, what was that? I don't know, she admitted, her voice muffled by his shoulder. I've always been weak. He pulled back, his hand cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. You have never been weak. You have been a survivor. There is a strength in that which no warrior can understand. He gently traced the mating mark on her neck, his thumb stroking the now healed skin. This mark. My wolf chose you not for what you were but for what you are. He sensed the power you kept hidden even from yourself. He then took her hand and brought it to the new, puckered scar on his shoulder. Now we both have scars from the night we truly chose each other. In that moment, lying in the quiet of their room, the last vestiges of her resentment towards him melted away. The bond had been forced upon her, but the love, she realized with a startling clarity, had been her choice. It had grown in the quiet moments, in the shared vulnerabilities, and had been forged in the fire of betrayal. He loved him. The monster, the alpha, the man. All of him. "I love you, Roland," she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. A profound emotion washed over his face, relief, joy, and a love so fierce it took her breath away. "And I love you, Selene," he replied, his voice cracking. "My mate. My Luna. My salvation." Chapter 17. Judgment and Mercy. The next day the pack gathered in the great hall for the judgment of the traitors. The mood was somber and tense. Roland sat on the Alpha's throne, Selene standing beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her presence there was a silent, powerful statement. She was not just his mate, she was his partner. Kale and Lyra were dragged before them, defiant and unrepentant. "He is weak." Kale spat, glaring at Selene. "She has poisoned his mind." Pack law was absolute. The punishment for challenging an alpha and using poison was death. The pack members murmured, expecting Roland to deliver the sentence. Roland looked at Kale, his former friend and beta, with a cold sadness. "Your betrayal cuts deep, Kale. For that, there must be a price." He then turned his gaze to Lyra, whose arrogance had finally crumbled into fear. But before he could speak the final judgment, Selene leaned down and whispered in his ear. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. After a long moment he nodded. He stood, his voice ringing with authority. "The law demands your lives. However," he paused, his eyes finding Selene's, "my Luna has asked for mercy." A collective gasp went through the hall. "Mercy does not mean forgiveness," Selene said, her voice clear and strong, addressing the crowd. "Their actions threatened our alpha and our pack's stability. They cannot remain among us." "Kale, Lyra, and all who stood with them," Roland declared, his voice booming. "You are hereby exiled. You will be stripped of your rank and cast out of the Blackwood territory by sunset. If you ever return, you will be hunted down and killed without hesitation. This is the judgment of your alpha and the mercy of your Luna." The sentence was in many ways crueler than death. To be packless was to be nothing. But it was also a sign of a new era. An era where strength was tempered with compassion. As the traitors were led away, the pack looked at Selene with a newfound, genuine respect. She wasn't the Omega who had trapped their alpha. She was the Luna who had saved him and shown them a different path. Chapter 18. A new dawn for the pack. The exile of Kale and his followers left a power vacuum in the pack. Roland needed a new beta, a new second-in-command. Instead of choosing a warrior based on strength alone, he and Selene made the decision together. They chose an older, wiser wolf named Marcus, a man respected for his level head and unwavering loyalty. Selene's mysterious power became a subject of quiet awe. With Alara's help, she began to delve into the old pack lore, searching for answers. They discovered ancient texts that spoke of rare omegas born with a deep connection to the earth and the spirit of the pack itself, so-called heart wolves. They weren't fighters but protectors, their power manifesting only when their pack or their mate was in mortal danger. Selene was not weak. Her strength was simply of a different, more profound kind. Her confidence grew with each passing day. She moved through the pack house not as an interloper but as its rightful Luna. She organized supply chains, cared for the elders and children, and served as a calm, empathetic ear for anyone with a grievance. She was the heart of the pack and Roland was its undeniable strength. Together they were healing the wounds left by years of cold, fear-based rule. The Blackwood pack for the first time in a long time began to feel like a family. Their nights were filled with a passion that was both fierce and tender. The bond was no longer a chain but a joyous, vibrant connection that deepened with every touch, every shared smile. Selene learned the man behind the alpha. His dry wit, the way he loved to run through the forest under a full moon, the profound guilt he still carried over his parents' death, which had thrust him into the alpha role too young. He in turn cherished her resilience, her quiet wisdom, and the fierce love she had once tried so hard to deny. Chapter 19. The Wolf at the Door. Just as a true sense of peace began to settle over the Blackwood pack, a new threat emerged. Scouts reported a large force gathering at their border. It was Alpha Gideon and the Red Creek Pack, but they were not alone. With them were the exiles, Kale and Lyra, their faces twisted with bitterness and a thirst for revenge. They had sold their loyalty and knowledge of Blackwood's defenses to Gideon in exchange for a place in his pack. Gideon had his excuse for war. He claimed Roland was an unfit alpha, proven by the recent coup attempt, and that his Omega mate was an unnatural witch who needed to be purged. It was a thinly veiled power grab, but with Kale's insider knowledge, it was a deadly serious threat. War was inevitable. Roland stood before his pack, no longer a feared, distant ruler, but a true leader fighting for his home. Gideon comes to our door because he fears our strength, he roared, his voice filled with conviction. He sees a pack united, a pack with a heart, and it terrifies him. He thinks our compassion is a weakness. Today we will show him it is our greatest weapon. We fight not for territory but for our families, for our future, for our Luna. The pack roared in response, a unified, thunderous sound. They were no longer just Roland's warriors. They were Selene's pack, and they would fight to the death to protect their Luna and the new way of life she represented. Selene stood beside Roland, her hand in his. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce resolve. She was no longer the girl who ran. She was the Luna of the Blackwood pack, and she would stand and fight for her home and her mate. Chapter 20. A Mate's Forever. The battle was brutal. Gideon's forces, guided by Kale, exploited weak points in the Blackwood defenses, and the fighting quickly spilled into the heart of their territory. Roland fought like a demon, a whirlwind of black fur and fury, his silver eyes fixed on one goal, Gideon. Selene was not on the front lines, but she was no less a part of the fight. She organized the healers, cared for the wounded, and moved among the pack's families, her calm presence a beacon of hope in the chaos. Her connection to the pack, the Heartwolf bond, allowed her to sense the ebb and flow of the battle, to feel the pain of her people and send waves of encouragement and resilience back to them. The climax of the battle came when Roland and Gideon finally met. Their alpha wolves clashed in a savage, bloody duel. At the same time, Selene was confronted by a crazed Lyra, a silver dagger clutched in her hand. "This is all your fault," Lyra shrieked, her face a mask of insane jealousy. "You took everything from me." As Lyra lunged, Selene didn't cower. The power rose in her, not as a concussive blast, but as a shield of pure energy that deflected the blade. Lyra stumbled back, stunned. Before she could attack again, Marcus, the new beta, slammed into her, disarming and subduing her. At that same moment, Roland, fueled by a surge of strength he felt through his bond with Selene, gained the upper hand. With a final, decisive roar, he overpowered Gideon, his jaws closing around the rival alpha's throat. The fight was over. The remaining Red Creek wolves, leaderless and broken, surrendered. In the bloody aftermath of the battle, Roland and Selene found each other amidst the wreckage. He was bruised and bleeding, she was exhausted and splattered with dirt, but they were alive and they were victorious. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his body trembling with the adrenaline of the fight and the overwhelming relief of her safety. "It's over," he murmured. "We're safe," she whispered back, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Chapter 21. The Fragile Peace. The scent of blood and pine slowly faded from the air, replaced by the smells of healing herbs and wood smoke from the funeral pyres. The victory over Gideon had been decisive, but its cost was etched into the heart of the Blackwood pack. Every family had felt a loss, every warrior bore new scars. The pack house, once a place of tension and fear, was now filled with a quiet, communal grief that bound them together more tightly than any victory could have. In the center of it all were Roland and Selene. They moved through the halls not as rulers but as pillars of support. Roland, his own wounds still healing, worked tirelessly to reorganize patrols and secure their borders, his presence a reassurance of their strength. But it was Selene who tended to the pack's soul. She sat with the widows, rocked the crying pups, and listened to the fears of the warriors. Her calm empathy, once seen as an Omega's weakness, was now their greatest comfort. Her Heartwolf ability allowed her to feel the collective sorrow, and she absorbed it, transforming it into a quiet resilience that flowed back into her people. One evening, Roland found her in the infirmary, long after everyone else had sought their beds. She was sitting by the bedside of a young warrior, gently changing the dressing on his arm. She looked utterly exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, yet her touch was steady and her voice a soothing murmur. He leaned against the doorframe, a profound ache of love and awe filling his chest. This was his Luna. Not a prize he had won but a gift he had been given. When she finally finished she saw him and gave a weary smile. He walked over, taking the stained cloth from her hands. His thumb brushed over a small shallow cut on her palm that she hadn't even noticed. "You heal everyone but yourself," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. He led her to a quiet corner and began to clean the small wound with a tenderness that made her heart clench. The simple, intimate act felt more profound than any passionate embrace. "I had to," she whispered, her voice trembling with fatigue. "They needed me." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. The silver in his was soft, vulnerable. "I needed you," he confessed, his voice cracking. "During the battle when I faced Gideon I felt your strength flow into me. But when I saw Lyra lunge at you, Selene, in that moment I would have let the world burn to keep you safe. The thought of losing you." He couldn't finish, the words choked by a fear he had never before admitted. She reached up, her clean hand cupping his jaw. "You didn't lose me, Roland. And you never will." He leaned into her touch, a shudder racking his powerful frame. They had won the war, but in the quiet of the infirmary, surrounded by the cost of their victory, they both knew this peace was a fragile, precious thing. The news of Gideon's fall would travel, and a pack perceived as wounded was a tempting target for wolves who lurked in the shadows. Chapter 22. Echoes of the Past. Weeks passed and the rhythms of pack life slowly returned. The rebuilding was a communal effort, and under the joint leadership of Roland and Selene, a new sense of hope began to bloom. The fear that had once defined their pack was being replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty. The first sign of a new storm came from a routine border patrol. Marcus, the new beta, found a small leather satchel caught in the undergrowth near the edge of their territory, far from any common path. It was Lyra's. Most of its contents were mundane, but tucked into a hidden pocket was a folded, oilskin-wrapped letter. It was not in her handwriting and it was not addressed to Cale or Gideon. It was addressed to her. Marcus brought it directly to Roland. Selene was with him in his study when he broke the wax seal. The script was elegant, controlled. It was not a letter of passion or alliance, but of instruction. It spoke of Gideon's predictable aggression and Cale's foolish ambition as tools to be used. It mentioned the need to cleanse the pack of Roland's tainted bloodline, and a promise that would be fulfilled once he was dead. But it was the last line that made Roland's blood run cold. "Your alpha is weak just like his father before him. Remember the lesson of that convenient accident. What a rogue wolf can do once, it can do again." Selene felt a wave of icy dread wash over her through the bond. The death of Roland's parents, the event that had thrust a young, unprepared Roland into the alpha role, had always been spoken of as a tragic rogue attack. A random, senseless act of violence. This letter painted it as something else entirely. A murder. An assassination. The man she had spent weeks coaxing out from behind his walls vanished before her eyes. The warmth in his expression was extinguished, replaced by the glacial cold of the alpha she had first met. He retreated into a dark, silent place within himself, a place filled with ghosts she could not reach. The trauma of his past, a wound he thought long scarred over, had been ripped open. That night she found him standing before a large, dust-covered portrait of his parents in a forgotten hallway. He didn't acknowledge her presence, his gaze fixed on the smiling faces of the man and woman he barely remembered. The air around him was heavy with a grief so profound it was suffocating. She wanted to reach out, to speak, to offer comfort, but she knew words were useless against a pain this old. Instead she simply came to stand beside him. She didn't touch him or speak his name. She just stood there, a silent, unwavering presence in the darkness, sharing the weight of his ghosts and reminding him, without a single word, that he was no longer alone in the shadows. Chapter 23. The Whispering Conspiracy. The letter became a poison, seeping into the fragile peace of the pack. Roland, with Marcus's help, began a covert investigation, sending his most trusted scouts to discreetly gather information about the old alliances and enemies of his father. He became consumed, spending long hours locked in his study, poring over old pack ledgers and maps. The nightmares returned, leaving him sleepless and on edge. To Selene, It felt as if a ghost had taken up residence in their bed. He was physically present, his body a warm, solid weight beside her, but his mind was a million miles away, lost in the shadows of the past. He was shutting her out, raising the same emotional walls he had used to keep the world at bay for years. He did it, she knew, to protect her, to keep her from the darkness of his own history. But it felt like a dagger in her heart. The bond that connected them became a conduit for his silent turmoil, a constant aching echo of his pain that she was powerless to soothe. One night she could bear it no longer. She found him by the hearth, staring into the flames, his jaw set like granite. She came and stood before him, blocking his view. "Talk to me, Roland," she said, her voice soft but firm. "There is nothing to talk about," he replied, his tone flat and dismissive. "Don't lie to me. I feel it. I feel every moment of your pain, your rage. It's a storm inside you and you are trying to weather it alone." She knelt before him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "When you saved me from Lyra, you told me we were in this together. Was that a lie?" A muscle clenched in his jaw. "I am protecting you." "No," she countered, her voice rising with a passion that surprised them both. "You are pushing me away. You are building walls around your heart again, Roland, and you are leaving me on the other side. Do you think my love is so fragile that it will break under the weight of your past? I am your mate, Iluna. Your equal. This burden is not just yours to bear. It is ours." Her words struck him like a physical blow. The icy facade in his eyes finally cracked and a raw, agonizing pain bled through. He pulled her into his arms, his face burying in her hair, his body trembling. "I'm afraid," he confessed, his voice a broken whisper against her skin. "The letter, it spoke of a weakness in my bloodline. My whole life I've tried to be strong, to be ruthless, to make sure no one could ever hurt this pack again. But what if they were right? What if there is some flaw in me, a flaw that got my parents killed? A flaw that will get you killed?" It was his deepest fear, spoken aloud for the first time. He wasn't just grieving his parents. He was terrified of failing the one person he loved more than life itself. Selene held him tightly, her own tears falling freely. He finally understood. He wasn't pushing her away. He was trying to shield her from a legacy of death he believed he carried. Chapter 24. The Unveiling. The emotional dam between them had broken. Roland, with Selene now by his side, shared every detail of the investigation. Together they connected the pieces of the puzzle, their minds working as one. The breakthrough came when one of the oldest scouts returned. He carried news that was both terrifying and clarifying. The rogue attack that had killed Roland's parents had occurred on a tract of land long disputed with the neighboring Silver Crest pack. The scout had learned that the alpha of the Silver Crest at the time had a reputation for cunning and treachery. And he had a son. A son who was now the pack's current alpha. A wolf named Alistair. The name was a thunderclap. It was the same name whispered in the letter to Lyra. Suddenly, the last 20 years of Blackwood history snapped into horrifying focus. This wasn't a recent plot. This was a war that had been waged in the shadows for a generation. Alistair, likely with his father's blessing, had orchestrated the murder of Roland's parents, making it look like an accident to avoid a full-scale war. He had then watched and waited as Roland, a young and brutal alpha, ruled through fear, inadvertently isolating his pack. Alistair had cultivated Gideon's aggression and manipulated Kale and Lyra's ambition, using them all as pawns to weaken the Blackwood pack from within, hoping they would tear themselves apart so he could finally step in and claim the territory his family had coveted for decades. Roland sat at his desk, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. It was a betrayal so deep and so old it had shaped his entire existence. His grief was a cold, heavy stone in his chest, but beneath it, a different emotion began to burn. A pure, focused rage. Selene came to stand behind him, her hands resting on his tense shoulders. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, her heart-wolf power flowed from her touch, not to extinguish his anger but to temper it, to hone its edge. The wild, destructive beast of his fury was being forged into a blade of pure justice. He was no longer a haunted son seeking vengeance. He was an alpha with a righteous cause. He placed his hand over hers on his shoulder and looked at the large map of the territories spread across his desk. His finger traced the border of the Silver Crest lands. "He took my family from me," Roland said, his voice a low, deadly growl, stripped of all emotion save for a chilling resolve. He tried to take my pack. He tried to take my future. He tried to take you. He looked up, his silver eyes meeting hers in the reflection of a polished letter opener. This ends now. Selene squeezed his shoulder, her presence a silent vow of support. We will end this now, she corrected him, her voice ringing with the strength he had helped her find. In that moment they were not just mates. They were a unified force, two halves of a whole, ready to bring the dawn after a long and starless night. Chapter 25. A Vow of Fire and Fury. The next evening the great hall was filled to capacity. A single, massive bonfire blazed in the center, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and the anxious faces of the Blackwood pack. Roland stood before them, not on the raised dais of the Alpha's throne, but on the floor among his people. Selene stood at his side, her hand clasped firmly in his. He told them everything. He spoke of the murder of his parents, his voice cracking with a grief he no longer hid. He spoke of Alistair's long, cowardly conspiracy, his voice hardening with a cold fury that resonated through the hall. He laid his soul bare, showing them not just his strength, but the vulnerability and pain that fueled it. He was not the untouchable, ruthless alpha of their past. He was their brother, their son, their leader, who had suffered a profound injustice that touched them all. For 20 years, the shadow of Alistair of the Silver Crest has hung over this pack. Roland's voice boomed, filled with a power that was no longer just about dominance, but about shared purpose. He sought to break us with whispers and betrayal. He thought our love and our loyalty were weaknesses to be exploited. He is wrong. A roar of agreement shook the hall. We will not wait for his shadow to fall upon our homes again, he declared. We will not seek a blind and bloody vengeance. We will seek justice. We will ride to the other alphas, we will expose his treachery, and we will drag his crimes into the light. The Blackwood pack will no longer be a land of fear and isolation. We will be a beacon of honor. We will fight not as conquerors, but as protectors of the peace he has sought to shatter. The pack erupted. It was not the frenzied cry of a mob baying for blood, but the unified, thunderous roar of a people with a righteous cause. They raised their fists and stamped their feet, their loyalty to their Alpha and Luna absolute. They would follow them into the fire. Later that night Roland and Selene stood on the stone balcony of their chambers, the cool night air a balm on their skin. The fragile peace they had briefly known was gone, replaced by the certainty of the coming storm. The future was dangerous and unknown, but for the first time, it was a future they were choosing together. Are you afraid? Roland asked, his voice a quiet rumble in the darkness as he turned to face her. Selene met his gaze, and for a moment he saw the faintest glimmer of that inner ethereal light in her eyes. The same light he'd seen when she'd faced down the traitors who would have killed him. She smiled, a soft, confident curve of her lips that made his heart ache with love. No, she said, her voice clear and steady. When I was alone, I was afraid of everything. Of shadows, of whispers, of my own pack. Now, she stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. With you, I am afraid of nothing. He pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a deep, passionate kiss. It was not a kiss of frantic desperation or of gentle tenderness. It was a vow. A silent promise of fire and fury, of shared burdens and absolute devotion. The girl who tried to leave quietly was gone. In her place stood a Luna, a protector, a heart wolf, whose power was love. And the cursed Alpha who had caught her was no longer a monster in the dark. He was a king standing in the light, ready to lead his people into a new dawn. Their story had begun with a chase and a forced mark, but it would not end until they had forged a new world from the ashes of the past together.